Good evening, Holliston. Welcome to the Select Board meeting for Monday, March 22nd, 2021. This evening we have an agenda that will start with the introduction remotely of Holliston's new Council on Aging Director. I'm looking for Lisa Boquetter. I see her posted up there. Good evening, Lisa. If you could activate or unmute yourself and introduce yourself to Holliston. We'd love to hear a little bit about what brought you here and what you look forward to doing as our next Council on Aging Director. Good evening.
Good evening. Can you hear me all right? I'm unmuted at this end. Excellent.
I can hear you quite well. Yes. Nice to see you.
Hi, Lisa.
Nice to be with you. I'm very excited to be joining you shortly to be your new director for the Senior Center. I've been, as the days have passed, I'm getting more and more excited to get to be with you and to begin. I have been someone who has been interested in working with older adults my entire life. And I have worked in a number of helping fields as well as program management and administration for a number of different kinds of projects. So I'm looking forward to meeting everyone, seeing what works well in Holliston, what programs the older adults in your community are enjoying the most, and looking at how they're using the center. I'm also hoping to make connections to other departments in the community, Youth and Family Services, the schools, your police and fire, and finding ways to work together to serve the community and serve the full range of ages that could be served by the Senior Center. So I'm very excited to be joining you soon.
Well, we appreciate that very much. One of the treasures within Holliston are our senior citizens, and we've always supported them. The Council on Aging has been a vibrant, centralized location where a lot of our seniors prior to COVID enjoyed social connections and resources that they couldn't otherwise get at their home. Throughout this period of COVID, it's been difficult, as you can probably imagine, on our senior citizens. I'd like to hear a little bit about what kind of thoughts you have going forward about ways to re-engage our seniors and show them that through your leadership they can expect any new different things that might be coming our way.
Okay. Well, it'll be an interesting process of reopening and helping people to feel safe coming back to the Senior Center. So following the guidance of the health department and how to reopen in a way that is most safe, we will follow all those protocols and rules. I understand that the folks who use the Senior Center enjoy a lot of the large events, and I think Linda's done a wonderful job. She's been there for a long time. I think she's going to be missed there. So I'm looking forward to spending some time with her in the next couple of months, learning about the program, seeing what is happening and how best to move forward. It will be.
Lisa, can you? I beg your pardon. Go ahead. Continue.
That's okay. It'll be a process of first absorbing what all of the programs have been, what's working best, and then looking at where are the gaps, where are the things that can engage people more fully, and also looking at the possibilities of doing things, looking at both virtual and in-person programming as an ongoing possibility, because I think that for some folks, being able to have remote access will be helpful at different times, even post COVID, and it gives folks access. So I do think that's an important thing to consider, keeping part of the mix.
Great. Before we move on to any questions from folks, could you just give us a brief background on where you came from before you arrived here in Holliston?
Sure. My most immediate position has been working at Beacon Hill Village in Boston. It is a virtual village in that it's not a physical location. We serve about 400 older adults in the downtown Boston neighborhoods. It is a member-run organization, and we do programs, services, and opportunities for people to stay involved and stay active by being on the board, deciding about programming, et cetera. I've been doing the member services for them and coordinating that piece. I've also been a life coach for the last 11 years, I'd say. I work with people across all age groups. My youngest coachee was 21, my oldest was 84. And I particularly worked with people who were looking to retire and planned second half of life. I've also been a coach trainer, so a teacher as well. And I worked with students across the board on every continent, which was pretty exciting. It was all virtual. Do you want me to, are you asking me to kind of go back and tell you some of the roles that I have had?
Only that you're comfortable. We're just looking to get a little familiarity, that's all. No need to read your resume to us.
That's fine. But I've done mental health counseling. I have a master's in counseling psychology and have worked also, I worked at Westboro Youth and Family Services and provided community counseling, one-to-one counseling and group counseling for the community. And I've also done program administration. So I've been the manager of a support services program, a volunteer program in Boston, which was a brand new grant that I basically created the program, did all of the statistics, hired, trained all of the volunteers, recruited the clients, and put together a program that allowed seniors to, again, stay in their homes as they aged. And I've also administered a $3 million grant funded program at Wellesley College with 3,000 subjects to help mothers of young children who were at risk for depression. So I've done a variety of different things over the years, but a complement of direct service and program management.
What a great background. So any questions? We'll start with that.
Actually, all I have is a comment. I just wanted to say welcome. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We look forward to working with you. And I'd say on behalf of the board that if there's anything that we can do to help you either, transition in, or if there's anything we can do in the future and you need our help with, just don't hesitate to reach out.
I will. Thank you so much.
And Tina, hi.
Yeah, Lisa, really want to welcome you. I really enjoyed reading your resume and your cover letter. It was like reading a good short story. It totally drew me in and told a great story. I think you're going to be a fantastic fit for the town of Holliston. I look forward to supporting you in your role. I'm particularly interested, I wonder if you could talk for just a brief minute, if you can, about your experience with advocacy for things like aging in place and improving access to the community for those who are the population that you'll be serving in your new role.
Mm-hmm. So I had recently considered, I've been asked a couple of times to be on the Council on Aging in Westboro. I was considering doing that, but right now I feel like I want to focus my time on Holliston. I have presented to the community. There's a nonprofit in Westboro called Westboro Connects, which does a number of things to bring the community together. I was on the planning board for a presentation, a event that they were doing, a full day event for older adults in the community. And I did a presentation about creating intentional community aimed at helping people to take ownership for their experience of what community is and how they should be involved. So I was one of the three speakers at this. It was called Aging and Enjoyably in a Connected Westboro's long name. And I talked about creating community and getting people involved. I'm also on a number of boards, the Life Planning Network, which works with the whole positive aging sphere about really supporting and inspiring positive aging, and by positive aging, a less ageist kind of view, and a view that people have something to contribute at every age. So not just seeing seniors as needy recipients, but also seeing them as an incredible resource and tapping into their strengths as well. And that truly has been important to me since I was a teenager. So I have been advocating for that in one way or another kind of my entire life, I would say.
I hope you'll find the board incredibly supportive of you in all of those efforts, and welcome again to Holliston.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll ask anybody who's joining us on the Zoom call this evening if they'd like to make a remark. Travis first, actually.
I would just point out that anything, what we can do during COVID to introduce Lisa to the community, we will be doing. I think Linda and Lisa have already discussed a few options for that, whether it comes to some of the drive-by opportunities that we've had in the past, those types of things. Any of those opportunities we'll bring and make sure we push out there for the whole community to be aware of. We're very excited. So just want to put that in there.
Thanks, Travis. Anybody in the Zoom? Any questions for Lisa? Hearing none. Lisa, pleasure to meet you this evening. We look forward to meeting you in person and wish you all the best going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it immensely. Have a good evening.
Good. You
Nice
too.
to meet you, Lisa.
We'll move on to our agenda, coronavirus community update. That would be with Chief Cassidy. Good evening, Chief.
Good evening. Happy spring. Happy spring.
Mm-hmm.
Looking a little low there.
We play the hand that we're dealt.
That's right.
So, since last week, we have had only 12 additional new cases. We have not had any changes to our active list since March 6th, so we still have 634 recovered. We have not been notified of any additional COVID-related fatalities, so that number has not changed since December 17th. We had 6 new cases on Tuesday, 5 new cases on Thursday, and 1 new case on Friday. There are currently 51 active cases, and I would note that 16 of those are older than 14 days, so we're waiting to hear from our nursing consultant when we can take some of those aged cases off. But the cases are spread out over 37 addresses, which include 27 single cases at single-family homes and 8 clusters at single-family homes. So as we've seen the pattern in the last couple of weeks, all of our cases are contained at single-family homes, nothing in the long-term care facilities, nothing in the group homes. So we are still needing to address spread within single-family homes. Looking at the graph, this now has an entire, next slide please. This has an entire year of data now, and so we continue to see the upward trajectory, and hopefully we will be able to take a few more of those active cases off soon. In terms of our positivity, next slide please. As of last Thursday, we are 8 weeks in the yellow, but for the 3rd consecutive week, our positivity is higher than the state's. We were at 2.48, the state was at 1.83, so we are now back up to the positivity level that we were in the middle of February, so we just want to continue to keep an eye on that. Looking at the map, next slide. Most of the communities around us are in the yellow, as we are. Sherburne is still in the gray, and of concern is the fact that last week Millis went back to the red category. So we're wanting to make sure that that doesn't happen here. In terms of where we are, next slide on the vaccination schedule. Hopefully most people know that based on some federal guidelines, the state has moved up eligibility. Today, residents 60 and over and certain workers became eligible to make appointments. As of April 5th, residents 55 and older and those with one comorbidity would be eligible to make appointments. And then looking forward to April 19th, when the general public ages 16 and older are able to make appointments. Everyone is encouraged that they should pre-register and book an appointment at a mass vaccination site at the website of mass.gov/COVID-vaccine. And appointments will be offered based on eligibility and available appointments nearby. In terms of vaccines in Holliston, as of last Thursday, nearly 3 out of 10 in our community are at least partially vaccinated. And that includes 75% of the 65 to 74-year-olds and 94% of the individuals 75 and older. So again, thank you to the Council on Aging, thank you to the Framingham Housing Authority, who oversees Cole Court, and brought in a vaccination on site thanks to the federal pharmacy program, who went out to Mission Springs Elderly Housing, and all of the volunteers who have been helping to get people appointments who have been eligible for the last month or so. And as of right now, 15% of our community are fully vaccinated. So we look forward to the vaccine channels of supply chain operating at full capacity. They are not yet what the federal government was predicting, and the state is anticipating some increases in the coming weeks. Do want to quickly touch on a couple variants. We talked before about the UK variant. As of the 21st, which was yesterday, there are 256 cases of the UK variant in Massachusetts. The UK variant, the so-called B.1.1.7, cases are now so numerous in the Commonwealth that they are no longer making individual notifications to local boards of health. Early on, when a community had a UK variant show up through testing, they would call the local board of health. Now there are so many that they've gotten to the point where local boards of health can find it in Maven, but they are not doing specific calls from the state. Next slide. We still only have seen 7 cases of the South African variant, that is the B.1.351. And then the third and final variant that I will focus on, last week I told you that we had not seen any of the Brazilian variant yet. As of last Tuesday, the state announced that they have identified 1 case of the Brazilian variant in the Commonwealth as of the 16th of March. Other variants that we want to be watching out for, there is a N501Y, which is in Columbus, Ohio, which is sort of a variant of the B.1.1.7. There's a Q667H, which is the Midwestern variant, and there is an L452R, which contributed to some outbreaks in California, and they're not sure if the surge that they've seen in California is related to just a variant or some other factor. Looking at some WHO data, of concern as we look ahead is cases continue to rise across the Atlantic Ocean, including in Italy, Sweden, France, Germany, and Denmark. And this is a bit worrying because in the last year we have seen that European cases have consistently acted as an early warning signal to the U.S. So you will see with most of these states that there is an increase there towards the end. Next slide. So when we compare U.S. data, the U.S. is holding. COVID cases have decreased for the last 9 weeks. Unfortunately, though, we have not yet fully recovered from wave 3. And there are some states that are of concern, including Michigan, New Jersey, District of Columbia, Idaho, and New Hampshire. And I am a little bit concerned. If you look in the red circle there with the arrow, that is Massachusetts. And you will see that we have seen some increases in recent weeks. So we need to watch hospitalization and death trends because there normally is an increase in hospitalizations, which is about a 3-ish week lag, followed by then an increase in deaths, which is about a 4-ish week lag. Currently, 13% of the population in the United States is fully vaccinated, but we want to continue to keep an eye on the trends. Next slide, please. So hopefully everybody knows that Phase 4, Step 1 began today. And so next slide, one of the impacts of that is the travel advisory replaces the travel order. And then another change that went into effect today, next slide, would be changes to gathering size limits. Gatherings at private residences continue to be restricted to a maximum of 10 people indoors and 25 people outdoors. But for event venues and public settings, those can now go up to 100 people indoors and 150 persons indoors, provided people can still space out appropriately. And with that, I will pause for the first part of my update.
Thanks, Chief. So we'll start with Mr. Sparrow with any questions.
Just kind of a comment slash question. I'm not sure if you saw the other day, Dr. Fauci was being questioned by a senator from Kentucky, and he was asking about masks and the importance of wearing masks even after being vaccinated. Could you just touch a little bit about the what was discussed there was basically that we have to be wary of variants. That
Yes.
even if you are vaccinated, there still could be the potential for the variants and the spreading of those variants. So could you just sort of touch a little bit about the importance of continuing the mitigation efforts even after vaccination?
Sure. So based on current guidance, they're anticipating, still recommending that folks continue to wear face coverings well into the fall or at least into 2022, because even if you have been fully vaccinated, you've gone through the entire course, whether that's 2 shots of the Moderna or Pfizer or 1 shot of Johnson & Johnson, after 14 days you're assumed to be, quote, fully vaccinated. But they don't have a lot of research to support what the impact of some of the variants are on the existing vaccinations that have received the emergency use authorization. Therefore, the recommendation is when you're outside of your household setting, when you're gathering with other individuals, even if you've both been, quote, fully vaccinated, to minimize the risk of potential disease transmission, they're urging folks to continue to wear approved face coverings. Okay. And so that will continue to be the guidance, and you know, especially in larger groups, they're going to continue to. This will still be a reality for us in May when we have town meeting. This will be stuff that we'll be doing for a while, and even the guidance for return to school for more students in session. Not only are they reducing the distancing, but they're still maintaining the facial covering requirements. They will have mask breaks outside in a well-ventilated area where the students can spread out, but yes, face coverings will continue to be the reality for a while, and part of it is although the vaccine may prevent the individual who is fully vaccinated from getting sick or being hospitalized, they could still be carrying a variant or the disease itself, and so wearing an approved face covering helps limit the potential for them of sharing that with someone else who may not have been vaccinated yet. Sure. So that's why the face covering continues to be guidance for a long time.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Ben. Tina?
Yeah, 2 questions. Are you hearing any reports from DPH or any of the calls that you're on in terms of the trends in who's getting hospitalized? So early on in the pandemic, we were seeing that the hospitalizations were older individuals that had sort of persisted throughout. We saw that certain comorbidities were driving hospitalizations. Are you seeing or hearing any reports on trends for current hospitalizations?
They have not drilled down to that level, but I certainly can ask. It is an interesting question because especially if you look at our local experience where over 90% of our 75 and olders and more than 2/3 of our 65 to 74-year-olds have received at least 1 shot, the likelihood is that the people who are getting sick enough to the point where they're being hospitalized are probably not that at-risk population, and it's probably some of the individuals with 1 underlying condition or 2 comorbidities.
Okay. And then you talked about positivity rates and numbers and so on. Are we seeing death rates trend down in the state, or are we seeing that they are leveling? I know they're not increasing.
They are leveling. Yeah, they really haven't. The data set isn't large enough that we can conclude that they're necessarily tapering off because it's still such a compressed period of time that we're looking at.
And then last question. Through your calls with CPH, are you learning or hearing about new treatments or the treatments that were sort of optimized over the fall to manage, and we did see a positive impact, I think, in large scale. Are you hearing anything more about advances in the treatment of those who are critically ill with COVID? Because I really want to underscore the importance here of perseverance with the safety measures that are in place. So are you seeing or hearing anything about new developments in the management of the
I haven't heard anything from DPH. The last time that we were getting updates from hospital personnel were on some of the calls with mayors and managers, and they haven't had a call for probably at least 6 weeks.
Okay.
So I'll keep my ear to the ground on that, but I have not heard a lot of advances. Obviously, the supply of ventilators, which was a huge issue a year ago. That's not been a concern of late.
But is that now shifted to home oxygen use?
They haven't talked a lot about that.
Okay.
I will keep my ear to the ground.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mike, nice twist this week with the perspective from the global pandemic. I do have a question about the variant. You indicated that the variant is no longer being called out by DPH in its statistics, but it's in Maven. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, in the event we had something happening in Holliston and maybe related to a variant outbreak, will we know?
Yes.
And if that is the case, from an emergency management perspective, does that change anything we're doing?
It probably would necessitate us doubling down on our messaging. Right now, we are in an awkward phase. I mean, some of this was queued up by Mr. Sparrow's question. Because so many people are to the point where they've received at least one shot, if not two, and they're feeling suddenly this freedom that they haven't felt for a year, there are a lot of individuals now who I have found are not as regimented with their use of face coverings or their gathering sizes. And it's hard because when you drive by a group of people, it used to be you couldn't quite tell if they were all a family unit, and now the question is, are they all vaccinated, and, at what point do you try to remind them that folks, for your safety and everybody else's, you need to disperse and not be together. So if through contact tracing and through epidemiological reporting, we determined that there was some sort of a variant spread that was taking place in Holliston, yes, we would probably need to change our messaging and target it either to specific groups or...
Right.
And again, one of my concerns as I look ahead is, although we have the timing of shots being available as of April 5th and then more shots being available for appointments as of April 19th, that's right around the time that our next major school vacation is coming up, and the supply still will not have caught up with the demand, and groups will still not have been able to get through. It will take them weeks for those additional categories to be able to even get their first dose. So I'm concerned that people are going to become lax as they see the light at the end of the tunnel.
In the event we do encounter that type of case in Holliston, I think it's something we'll have to heighten around the messaging and perhaps other actions as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Let me turn to the public real quick. Ask folks on our Zoom call if there are any questions for you relative to the coronavirus community update. Are there any questions? Hearing none, let's move on to the Karzak Programmatic update.
Okay, great. So, unlike the last couple of weeks where we only had very small increases in our spending week to week, this week we did see a big jump, and this had been foretold by our town administrator, who did advise you last week that included in the warrant that you approved last week, that included the round 3 of the rent and mortgage relief. And so, advance a couple slides there. Next one. So the new bottom line is we've obligated $714,000. On the next slide, if you look graphically, in terms of the pie chart, again, we're very pleased that rent and mortgage slice of the pie has now increased from $50,000 to $75,000, and we look forward to hearing from our Youth and Family Services Director and the Community Action Fund on more families being helped to be able to stay in their homes. In terms of requests, next slide. I have 2 for you. So back on December 28th, the board had approved the twice daily cleaning of high-touch and high-use areas for the period of January to March. And so my recommendation would be that we extend that through first the end of the fiscal year, and then my recommendation would be a separate vote to address the question that had come up last week with regards to budget planning for FY22. Knowing that this CARES funding expires December 31st of 2021, there would be money available from July to December. So just in terms of keeping our votes clear and distinct, I would look for one to do the last quarter of fiscal year 21, and a separate vote to continue the twice daily cleaning July to December.
Any questions on that, Ben?
Yeah, just one. I thought we were talking about budgeting about $34,000, so why is this?
So the number that the town administrator had with regards to, that was in the facilities budget.
Yep.
That covered places like Town Hall, 1750.
So this would be, this is additional.
This also covers, and it also includes a public safety building where they have special orders in place that anytime they have a guest, there is a targeted cleaning and disinfecting that takes place at all of the locations where the guest had been.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
Tina, any questions?
No, none.
The only, I don't quibble with the request, I'm curious if you've heard from Parks and Rec about their looming spring programs, summer programs. Are they still working on how that's going to be? Because if we're funding FY22 high-touch use cleaning in public buildings, would that include public restrooms and things like that at the parks? Guessing not, but...
Yeah, so the guidance for parks has not come out from EEA yet. They were talking about some modifications to last summer's regulations, but last summer they really weren't able to open the public restrooms. They had to use, there were challenges with the existing composting toilets that they had in some locations, so they had to be very creative with their, But as EEA guidance comes along, if we need to increase the request.
But this purposely excludes any consideration of that, because we just don't know.
Correct.
Got it, thank you. I will entertain a motion to approve $23,310 in FY21 for high-touch, high-use cleaning for April through June.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And I'll entertain a motion for $46,620 in FY22 for similar high-touch, high-use cleaning 2 times a day for July through December.
So moved.
Second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you.
Carrie.
And then, next slide, the one last thing, and we did touch on this briefly last week, but we are still awaiting for guidance to come out from the U.S. Treasury, as well as initial guidance to come out through A&F. But what we do know is that the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, the eligible uses are broader than those of the CARES Act Coronavirus Relief Fund. And although guidance previous released for the CARES Act funding may provide insight into how Treasury will interpret and implement these provisions, we're still eagerly anticipating the guidance and to see exactly how that is going to pan out for our community in the future. As soon as I know something more, I will let you know.
I had a conversation with Chief and Travis last Friday. After a conversation with DLS, I learned that the American Rescue Plan Act, as Chief indicated, contains much more lenient use of federal resources to supercharge the economy, get people back on track. Some of the significant changes will be first the timeline. This funding, I think, takes us through the end of December 2024. Is that correct, Chief?
Yes.
And there's some consideration right now at the state level to interpret how the money will be applied, whether it's a grant or something that has to be applied as general fund revenue. They're still assessing that, but all in all, it does appear to be a very generous and very, very helpful funding solution coming our way in the next 30 to 60 days. I would think we'll learn more. Is that your understanding, Chief?
Yes.
In terms of the time frame for the whole thing to shake out?
Yes.
All right, any questions for Chief Cassidy relative to the CARES Act programmatic update this evening? Hearing none. I think you've done a great job again, Chief. Thanks for joining us this week.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
will now turn to warrants starring Ben Sparrow.
We have one warrant. I would like to make a motion to approve the warrant for $1,077,144.98. Of that, $124,143.24 is town payroll.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
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 That carries. Anything else, Ben, or is that it? All right, we will move to public comment. Mr. Sparrow.
Nothing tonight.
Tina.
Just happy birthday to my son.
Oh,
Turns 21.
happy birthday.
Happy
What's his
birthday.
name?
William.
William, happy birthday.
Thank you.
21. They're a really good age.
He's in a city with a curfew.
That's great. The only public comment I'll make this evening is, to my colleagues, to those listening, next Monday night, we're planning to, have a public, meeting relative to the project known as 555 Hopping Brook. Folks understand that our planning board has been engaged in a process for several months studying, that applicant's use of, industrial park space. Yet there does appear to be a need to have a public discussion for elements on the non-planning board side of things. This board is uniquely qualified to look at things like traffic, environmental and other impacts that go beyond the planning board process. So we're setting up an agenda that will be released tomorrow, Travis, that would tentatively look like a brief update by our applicant, in this case CRG, followed by an opportunity for our board to ask questions. Some may remember we saw them late 2020. Things have changed, and we certainly want to hear from them about the changes in the program and maybe apply some questions of our own relative to our sphere. Following that, I do intend to give the public up to 2 hours of input to bring forth any concerns they may have. The agenda will note that we're looking for unique voices, non-redundant messaging. We want people to be able to join us and contribute their concerns, their questions, their points of view, so that they can be heard and help this process along. So we'll generate some public discussion next week. We'll give it a shot, see what roughly 2 hours of public input brings, and if there's a need for another meeting after that, we can assess that. But I think from a public perspective, nobody at the end of this project should feel like they did not have the opportunity to be heard, and that's the goal. So we'll see you next Monday night. Should be a late night. Hope you guys have dinner before you get here. But Travis, did you want to add anything?
I would just point out we'll start our meeting earlier at 6:30 to get through the normal course of business as quickly as possible before we have them, knowing that it will be relatively late night.
Tina, go ahead.
One question, John, are you going to have, invite any guests? So do we expect Town Council Jay Tallerman, or?
We expect Jay Tallerman.
Yeah, Jay's been a pretty good presence on the planning board side. He'll join us to pretty much call balls and strikes just to make sure that things stay the way they need to, because while this process is informative and we want people to feel like they're part of this initiative, we recognize that there's a lot at stake, and we do need and would require Jay's presence just in case anything goes sideways, which I don't expect, but he's been helpful to date. So that is it on public comment from this side. Anybody else? I see some guests here tonight. Did you guys have any public comment at this point? Did you want to bring forth? So just identify your name. It's for those at home. You can come up and address us, please. That would be great. And then we'll go to the Zoom if anybody else wants to add some people public comment.
So, Chris Pantano, CEO of Madeira Inc.
Hi, Chris.
How's it going?
Good.
So, two things. One, we're not getting a response very well on, we have about 20 grand worth of aquaponic equipment we are donating to the high school, so we can teach kids actually how sustainable farming, which is extremely important, especially in this day and age.
Yep.
But no one's getting back to us. So I doubt anyone else is going to come along and offer this type of stuff, so I'm just trying to understand as to why. Maybe someone could put us in touch, or...
Okay.
Yeah, so...
All right.
Those are ASD filters are like top of the line.
All right.
Second thing would be, I would like public comment from each one of the council members on social equity applicants and economic empowerment applications for marijuana businesses, and what the town stance would be on that.
Okay. Do you have any comment on that, Ben, or Tina?
No,
You don't have to.
I don't have any comment at this moment. I'd like to kind of look into it and dive into, so I can have be able to really have an informed response to your question.
Yeah, no problem.
I don't really have anything at this time.
Yeah, I'm going to be introducing an economic empowerment applicant to the town in the coming weeks.
Okay.
And I was, like I said, try to be proactive and stay on top of things.
Okay.
We can have our lawyers reach out, whatever we need to do, but yeah, I was curious to see if anyone else had any takes.
Okay, I think you're drawing a distinction between that type of applicant and a different type of applicant.
It is a different applicant.
No, I understand, but you're drawing a distinction. Could you just explain it?
You want to explain economic empowerment or social equity? I'm looking for that from, you guys...
Where the social equity applicant falls under the process that you brought this, there has been no applicant to the town, so...
Yeah, there will be one introduced in a couple weeks. They're just handling all the paperwork.
I think the science is asking for more context.
they open up the licenses for short windows of time, people that are, there are certain categories that you can apply for to, essentially have a step up at the next level at the state level.
Okay.
Usually people that have been, grew up in the area of disproportionate impact, stuff along that lines. So, I'm helping one of them run their company and get it up and running, and they're looking at Holliston and looking at help them out, give back to the community. So it was like I said, I was just trying to get an idea from your end how you feel about those type of things moving forward.
So I would go to the CCC for information on that, so that's where I will go. We have not had an applicant come forward before, so I'm not familiar with the differences, the distinction between this type of applicant and other types of applicants in town. So I'd have to go to the CCC, so I'm assuming that's a good place to go. In terms of your comment about the donation that you would like to make, I believe it was directed towards the schools possibly in their agricultural program.
Yeah, I don't know who we were in contact, but we haven't heard back from. It's a big delivery. It's going to be like, it's a 600-gallon tank. We have the fish. It's like a pallet jack that we're going to use. Like, it's a huge filter. Okay, so
I'd put you in contact then directly with Dr. Kuska, who's the superintendent of the schools. I notified her. I was aware that you had a donation, and I notified Dr. Kuska and Travis Ahern that you were looking to make a donation. You had an offer. And I heard back from her on the 12th of March, so just about 10 days ago, and I provided her, so this is what I gave her, meredith@maderiinc.com.
Perfect.
Okay, so.
I'll introduce myself. Meredith, did you have two I's in the middle? Because sometimes, if not, it doesn't go through, but if,
So I think I
it's
copied.
Maderi, there's like an I and then ink, so there's actually two I's there, and sometimes that gets missed.
Well, that is one thing I did right today. I included that, and this was on the 16th.
Okay.
So
I'll go back and check to make sure it didn't get put into spam, but, yeah, I know that's a common mistake.
Nope,
so
I
just wanted to make sure.
Looking at it here, it looks like I got it right.
And mostly it's for the greenhouse. Like, there's only so much space I believe they have. I don't know the square footage, but we have all kinds of different stuff. So it's just a matter of, like, what can be used, what can't be used, so that we don't deliver a bunch of stuff that's not used.
Sure, I mean, we can't speak to the decisions of the school committee or the school department, but she certainly has your information. She sounded interested, and I'm sure she either has or will get in touch with you soon.
Perfect, thank you.
Feel free to reach out to her.
Oh, hey, anything for the kids.
Thank you.
Gotta eat healthy.
Thank you, Chris. Any other public comment this evening from anybody assembled on our Zoom call? Hearing none, we'll move on to the comments from the town administrator. Good evening, Travis.
Good evening. A couple items. One thing would be that today we had a kickoff meeting with the LRRP. The town has been assigned a consultant, Nelson Nygaard, through the LRRP program through Mass Development, the Downtown Initiative. All these groups change names quite frequently, but our consultant is Nelson Nygaard. They had a kickoff meeting today with the group that we've assembled to support businesses. There will be a business survey that's coming shortly. We'll be pushing all that information as quickly as possible. So we're in the data collection portion of that program, with the end result hopefully being a number of initiatives or suggestions that come out of that that we can be bringing back to the board to help the businesses in town affected by COVID. We're very excited about that process and excited to get working with Nelson Nygaard. Additionally, and along the same lines, because everything else will fall under items 6 and 7 of our agenda, would be that I am looking for some direction from the board as it relates to a priority list. The FY22 budget for Senator Spilka and Rep. Dykema, we provide on an annual basis of items that may be of interest. I've put together a draft based on previous items we put forward, including a new item, which is the 9 Green Street demolition. Obviously, any of these projects that are on our capital list or list of projects in the community that we can get paid for through the state is just, obviously helps any of these along. At the same point, we want to make sure that we're putting forward the priorities of the community. So we can certainly come back to this under other businesses, but that is the last update that I have for this evening. The other update that the chair mentioned earlier is that next week on Monday, March 29th, we will have the 555 Hopping Brook group here, and we will push out all of that information tomorrow through the website. Anybody who signed up for updates through the 555 website will receive that, and we'll have the agenda posted as early as possible, which will be tomorrow for next Monday. So I can discuss this now or under other business later, but I would
bring it in now. It's fine.
Okay. So the items, we're looking for 4 to 5 items. I have 4 here. 9 Green Street demolition. We've obviously started the planning process by engaging Par Corp after the December 5th special town meeting approval of design engineering services. At the moment, we are looking most likely at the first cost in the $50,000 to $100,000 range. So I put that on here. Next, Goodwill Park bathroom renovations. This is something I've continued to hear from and has been actually on this list in previous years as well. I know it is a priority of the Parks Commission. It's been highlighted numerous times, and there's going to be questions over how it would be funded at some point, but I know it's a priority, so that is on this list. Sidewalk connectivity was actually on this list 2 years ago as well. As we highlight here, we're sort of looking at any option for funding any of these projects that are prioritized. We have, again, the prioritization plan that was approved at the December town meeting. We are engaged with numerous grant opportunities such as Safe Routes to Schools, Complete Streets, Shared Streets and Spaces, and other grant programs, but this will be potentially another funding source. The cost estimate I have on this is $250,000 would accomplish at least 1 mile of sidewalks under the general calculations that we do per linear foot of sidewalk. And lastly is the Blair Square redevelopment. Obviously, we've had numerous discussions on that. We will have a discussion on potentially looking at the design engineering, the preliminary design stage we're through. We're on to now design engineering, looking for construction documents for the Blair Square committee to take this to the CPC in the fall. This would be an excellent opportunity to sort of make sure that the funding is lined up potentially through the state's budget process. So those are the 4 that I've highlighted. Obviously, any feedback from the board so that we can get this off to our reps.
Any questions on that, Travis? Excuse me, Ben?
Yeah, just one. Do we have a sense of, like, for sidewalk connectivity, like which sidewalks we would be talking about, or are we just talking about potentially some money and then we would kind of wait for the study?
My intention here would be to say that, you know, obviously within the Complete Streets process, we're going into Tier 3, right? So we would want to make sure that anything we can get done through that process is getting done. This would be, obviously, we're going to have the prioritization list that we kicked off, got funded in December.
Yep.
Would be that the first, you know, the low-hanging fruit that's identified through the prioritization plan, we now have sort of funding lined up. That would be the intention.
Okay. That's fine.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get nitty-gritty for a minute here. The 9 Green Street demolition item, I would say 2 things that strengthen this as a request. One is that this satisfies some DEP issues that we have, and I don't see that in here. I just feel like whenever we can connect to state-level issues, that's a good thing. And then this is definitely a site within the LRRP work that we're about to do. So I think that connects. Anything that demonstrates that the town of Holliston has been and continues to be committed to these projects in other ways, I think strengthens our request. I'd say for the sidewalks connectivity request, the fact that we had DOT out for a site walk, we addressed some of these things. We actually addressed quite a few of them when Mass DOT was out for the sidewalk. And then for the Blair Square redevelopment, again, the LRRP, I think, connects our commitment to and the state's involvement in that area, and then shared streets and spaces where we got the grant money. I think that shows that we put the effort in and have received state funding. So, you know, in terms of the state continuing its commitment to things that it's already demonstrated a willingness to help us in is maybe an important thing. That's all. I think it looks great, though. I don't have anything else to add than that.
Great. No, I agree. It's about $880,000 worth of projects. I think there are a total of 4, correct?
Yes.
So good here. So if you want to bring it forth for signature,
we'll make some tweaks based on that feedback, and I'll get it in front of you to get signatures.
That's great. Thank you very much.
And that's all I have under number 5.
Any comments from anybody in the Zoom for the town administrator? Hearing none, let's roll into the FY22 revenue budget review and discussion. Travis.
Okay, so the steps that were taken last week, and I can get in as much discussion as we'd like this evening. Some of it will interface with number 7, the warrant development as well. But essentially where we are after last week, the select board adjusted the facilities budget. The chief closed the loop on that conversation earlier by making sure that the funds were in place through CARES. And so at this point, the model that we have is still waiting essentially for a final decision from the schools. The schools will be in front of the Finance Committee tomorrow evening. We have plugged in the superintendent's budget request, and at this time, we are certainly tight to the bottom line, but at this point, we're looking probably more at potential tweaks that we would have on the town side as it relates to CARES and ARPA funding. And at the moment, we are looking at a placeholder of $1.85 million for tax-supported warrant articles. That would be money into the capital expenditure fund, anything as it relates to the stabilization fund, and a number of projects that we'll go through under item number 7 on our agenda this evening. And so at this moment, we're in good position. I'll continue to monitor the discussions. The Finance Committee, a couple conversations that I've got involved in that didn't necessarily come through this board, but still need to be wrapped up, are requests by groups that don't go through the select board through the current process. That is, one is the town clerk's office looking for a change in the position before that gets posted. That conversation started last Tuesday with the Finance Committee, and I intend to carry on the feedback that I had after working on some of the things that they asked me to come back with, looking sort of outside the box on how that can be accomplished. Additionally, the Board of Health requested additional hours as well, and I'm continuing to have conversations as it relates to that, and I'll be bringing to the FinCom tomorrow evening. So as of right now, on the bottom line, with our model, we look good. It is, there are certainly things that are being tweaked. For example, Keefe Tech has tweaked their budget down from their original appropriation, and we're still waiting to see anything that they may be doing with ESSER funding. So I provided you with the updated number with that brought their request down about $20,000. And so right, at this moment, I can certainly show where we are with revenue. Again, nothing's changed from the original discussion that we've had on that. We are looking at flat state aid, which, going into last year was sort of the biggest holdup with the budget, was assuming potentially a reduction. Obviously, assuming flat state aid is better than last year, at the same point, it's not an increase. And if we get, an update from them, from the state, we can certainly look at updating the model. But right now, we're in pretty much a steady state, awaiting new information or any updates to come. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on where we are or put anything up on the screen to sort of highlight the basics of where we are.
All right, Ben, you're up.
If there's no changes, I don't really think I need any answers to questions. I think they're status quo.
All right, Tina?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you have mentioned participating in a capital subcommittee meeting. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard any discussion at a detail level here at this board, so I'm assuming they're not ready to make a recommendation for the warrant.
No, so we had a meeting posted last week and didn't reach quorum for a variety of reasons. So the basic discussion has been Ben Sparrow, in his role previously on the Finance Committee and the Budget Capital Subcommittee, had put forth a few things that probably should be in the report going into town meeting based on our bylaws. So we discussed sort of how that may look. Additionally, I've been developing what is a more traditional 5-year CIP document under the ICMA model, and so I've provided that to the group for feedback. I am looking at the schools have put forth sort of what their capital needs are for May, and I'm trying to look at May versus October. I can certainly put that up as well. It is in draft form. And so right now what we're looking at as it relates to number 6 and number 7 on our agenda this evening are anything that we would support through the capital budget in May, we would look to replenish the capital expenditure fund, at least that amount, which I believe we can do under the $1.85 million that we have in our model for the warrant. And I can, if you would like, I can just sort of bring up what some of those items are, if you want to talk capital.
I think so. Would you mind? Yeah.
That'd be great.
Is that all right with that?
I was going to ask the same question, actually.
All right. So I apologize. This is not my my standard clean. Well, that is not what I expected to see on the screen. Is it just that screen, or am I actually not sharing with the audience?
No, I'm seeing it on my screen.
You're seeing it on your screen? All right. Can we just, Christian, if you could just try to pull up the Zoom so that we can see it on this screen as well, I'd appreciate it.
While they're doing that, Travis, you have heard from the schools regarding capital?
I have, for May specifically, and so one of the things that we talked about, and I'll get it to on the bottom here in blue, these are not specifically, on the right-hand column is projecting forward to October, so on the left-hand column is for May, and so these are the numbers that I'm aware of, and the funding source at the top may change slightly. The ones that are highlighted at the top are still subject to change. I'm still waiting for more information. On the bottom, as you see the schools, the two numbers on the left, the 55,000 and 26,400, those have been highlighted by the school committee. That was presented in a previous school committee request, and so that is what they have for May. The two items, Chromebooks and rooftop units set aside, those are from a roll forward from the previous Collins Center report, and I just made it clear to Ann Louise, who was on the Capitol call the other day, and Keith Bidet, I'll remove them if they know they're not going to be for October, but I don't want to do that until I get word from them. So they're sort of placeholders at the moment. So let me just sort of go from the top here. Blair Square is one that we'll talk about as a item. This is one where what they're looking to get is construction documents that would put them on a trajectory that by the October town meeting they'd be able to bring construction documents to the CPC, right? So 45 is the number that I have as a placeholder, but we will still be discussing that. 9 Green Street demolition, the $100,000, as I just discussed, is a placeholder. The PAR has a deliverable due to the select board in the coming week, actually, on the demo plan. So I'll get that to you as soon as possible. The TAC public safety we'll be discussing under item number 7 here tonight. That number I also have as a placeholder because I need just to make sure that everybody's on board with the equipment. The feasibility study is CapEx here, but actually would be raised and appropriate. Design engineering can be through CapEx. Feasibility would be raised and appropriate. So that is something that I have factored into the $1.85 million. All of these things are, excuse me, the police, they're relatively small items. These are all timed. A number of them are interfacing with Chris Mayo, who has prioritized these for us, which I put over here, white items 1 through 4. The vehicles would be planned for October, per usual. Some of these come from, the facilities come from James Keast, security cameras, and Central Fire Rehabilitation. That's a multi-year process for Central Fire that James Keast has laid out. We can go through all of that. DPW radio replacement is specifically a request. Actually, Chief Cassidy could speak to it better than I can, that this frequency is opened up, and if we have the opportunity to get DPW on that same frequency, we would take it, and there would be a cost, but we think that that's the right operational decision. The Alliance Sweeper we heard from when Sean Reese presented that budget. We actually have a couple things that are going on. Street sweeping will be starting this week. Trying to contract that work out while we wait for our street sweeper to come back. When our street sweeper comes back, the intention would be certainly to replace it and have that as a trade-in. And then obviously the school request. Everything else for October is obviously more fungible, but this is sort of what we're looking at right now for the full fiscal year, May being the priority. So everything on here would either be through raise and appropriate, such as the feasibility study, or would be coming out of CapEx but replenished through raise and appropriate. And that's sort of what we're looking at right now for capital.
So in your conversations with the school committee and your conversations with the finance committee or with the superintendent and business manager at the schools, is there anything left off the table with that chart? Is there anything that was discussed that did not come forward for either May or for October?
No, I think honestly the question for Chromebooks, if I understand it, is because some of those things have been accelerated, it's going to be whether it's needed in October or not. But I just, again, I don't want to remove it from view until we know that it may be that they can make it through December 23rd. But there were concerted efforts, obviously, to move up the Chromebooks. Yep. The rooftop units, my understanding through the business manager of the schools, is his primary concern. So I just want to make sure that number is also refined so we know exactly what it is. And if that number needed to be moved up to May, I'm unaware at the moment. Right now, the requests that were presented in May are the ones that were presented to the school committee.
As necessary and expedient?
Yes.
Okay. And then with this, capital subcommittee, anything from those discussions not brought forward on the chart you just had up there?
Not yet. We're sort of early stages. I think, I want to make sure that they get all of the information that they need as related to this, but my focus with them also, with that group, is sort of introducing the whole 5-year sort of the document itself, and that's been my focus at the moment. May and October, quite honestly, in the 5-year picture, do not appear to be, of major note, but there are things that we just want to put anything that we're spending in May or October in the context of a 5-year look for other needs that we know are coming, and that's really the goal there.
Okay, so we can move forward with some level of confidence that these conversations have been detailed and ongoing, and
yes.
Okay.
Yep, and
all right.
We'll continue.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tina. Just a couple of thoughts, Travis. First of all, each week as you present this, it's so thoroughly impressive. You've done a wonderful job pulling together all of the aspects of our budget, including the revenue, the expenditures, the projections, conservatively, albeit. We're in very good shape financially. We have a modest surplus at this point. Really like the way you've kind of pulled this together. You mentioned earlier that you're funding the tax-supported articles, I think also known as CapEx, at around $1.85 million. Is that a number that we traditionally budgeted in the past for those types of things?
So if you, I'll pull up this view. So this is the full view that I believe we showed at a previous point in time. So this is the revenue up top. Again, nothing here has changed. This is, I'll note, showing the max levy capacity under 2.5 with what is the modest 350 or 325, that we assume for new growth. The excluded debt goes down, but obviously is offset by debt service that's going down, that I'll show in a second. The state aid right now, again, I just have level from FY21. It may tick up slightly, but that's just to remain conservative. This is the same 410 that we showed previously, increasing, and we're bringing that back to historic levels. The one thing I want to mention again is 18, 19, and 20 are actuals. FY21 is based on the tax rate recap. That's how we set the tax rate. And FY21 is based on the projected that we're at right now. So this is bringing it back to the assumed level pre-COVID. It's also adding in $150,000 in solar revenue based on our conversations with that group as it relates to the Marshall Street project. The Water Enterprise Fund goes up substantially, but that is related to, obviously, water-specific revenue and is related to the debt for well number 5, which Mary Boxgett and myself are having discussions on the borrowing process for that. The bids did come in below appropriation, so we are moving forward. Moving down to the budget, right now, again, I've adjusted KEEP slightly based on the latest number from them. But with the school's request, and just to put this in context, the overall revenue increase of $1.5 million is actually dwarfed by the education and Keep Tech increase of over $2 million. But we do have other reductions in the budget, such as the reserve fund going from $790,000 back to its normal level of $325,000, and other things such as the debt service that is non-excluded. So debt service that goes down but is offset, I hate to keep flipping back and forth, but is offset by the reduction in the excluded debt. There's also debt service that was non-excluded that is now off our books as part of the reason that we're able to do this. And you can see that full amount down here at $611,000. And then this is the warrant article amount that you just asked about. And to put it in context, it is higher than the 2019 and 18 actual, but it is lower than we were able to do in FY21 when it comes to all items, not just going into CapEx, but anything tax supported, which would be money going into CapEx, money going into the stabilization fund, money going directly to projects for raise and appropriate. And then there is a slight change. Just to interrupt you real quick, and to be clear, that number that we appropriate for FY22, come October, what we don't spend in the spring, what we will fund is offset also by free cash. Right, and so free cash lines up a little bit separately on here. Right now, I have nothing assumed because right now we have no free cash number. Free cash will be available in October potentially. That number, we don't know what that number will be. Based on our revenues, we look like we'll probably be generating a free cash of over $1.5 million.
But it complements the
right, free cash
tax-funded capital art.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've accomplished quite a bit of capital work in town through not just the CapEx fund, but also free cash.
So you're basing the 1.85 on historical numbers?
Yes.
Is there any other guide that you see outside of Holliston through your experience or through some other financial means that justifies what percent or how much a community should be looking at to fund through tax supported articles? In other words, why that number or why that percent of the omnibus, whatever that is?
Well, one thing I'm looking at is the number of articles that we have lined up. They're going to be raised and appropriated in May, and so that pulls into this. Then additionally, as I said, anything that we pull out of CapEx, we want to be replenishing. The number that we have there is going to be helpful as we approach conversations like we'll have under the warrant development when it comes to things like DPW facilities and those types of items. We want to make sure that we're leaving capacity and borrowing for those large projects and being able to accomplish other capital through the CapEx fund. So making sure that balance stays healthy is a priority. We're able to accomplish that in May with the 1.85 million number, including talking about a number of items that we'll continue to discuss through warrant development, and to put more money into CapEx at the moment based on, and actually let me flip to another screen here, and I'll zoom in a little bit on where we are in 21 as it relates to the financial policies. So the reserve fund, as we ended up at 0.79 for the measurable, actually was above policy of over 1% of our omnibus budget. That was by design because this year was difficult. That was a conversation that we had going into July and December. At the same point, right, that's why that number is coming back in the budget down to $325,000. Stabilization fund, we are within policy, above the goal, but below the maximum at 11% in FY21. Then when it relates to capital outlay, as you mentioned, cash for capital being between 3 and 5% omnibus, that's where we are as it relates to FY21. And then above 2% omnibus is the only thing that's in the policy as it relates to where the balance of the CapEx fund is. And as you can see, we are above that at 10%. So it is not related to specifically our policy that's making us stay at that level of CapEx, but it is what we know is coming as we look at our 5-year capital needs that says that we absolutely need to be in that range. For me to make the case to increase above that, I don't think I can make that case.
Excellent. Now, one of the things that also I wanted to draw out is, in my experience on this board, we have not had the benefit of using the capital planning committee and the use of that so-called Collins report as a tool to look back on and bring forth capital items. We've talked about it, I think, from the finance committee when we talked about it last year, but now we're using that committee and its resources as a ways to bring things forward before they become problematic. So that's also a big improvement what we've seen in the past few years.
Yeah, it's been a great group.
Yeah. All right, great job. Any questions, any follow-up questions on what you just saw? Tina, Ben, you good? You good? Okay. And we do have a question. Mr. Alfred, good evening, Dan. How are you? Good questions?
How you guys doing?
Doing really well, thanks. What's on your mind?
Good. I just wanted to point out that while the Finance Committee certainly hasn't taken any votes on this, our current model does currently differ with Travis on the capital, allocation sort of set aside. Travis doesn't break it out exactly the same way that we do, but we're at 2 million. I think he's closer to 1.5, and so with sort of articles appropriation set aside, we're like 2.3 total. And one thing I would point out is that if you actually look at his sheet, there's about 2.5 million of total sort of potential spending. I guess that some of that could probably be cut back a little bit, but there's also things that always come up late. So it was just something that we're going to have to work on, as we go through the budget process. But I think that from the Finance Committee's perspective, while we haven't, again, taken votes on this, we do have more of a deficit than Travis is showing.
Now, what was that 2.5 you mentioned, Dan? Where did that number come from?
the spreadsheet that Travis just showed, if you look at the October and the May and October sort of anticipated requests, if you will.
Sure.
Just out of the general fund, excluding obviously water and things that would come out of that enterprise fund. I don't know if Travis, you want to bring it up again, but that was, I just saw that and you know.
Yeah, actually.
The other thing is, if I could just take a step back to going into the COVID recession. Prior to that, we had built up the set aside to be $2 million. We cut it back, obviously, because we were in very sort of extraneous, or not extraneous, existential, whatever you want. We were in special circumstances, so we cut it back to 1.5 last year, and our goal was to build it back up to that $2 million, so that we could continue sort of on increasing the set aside, so that we wouldn't necessarily have to rely on always getting a good free cash number. In the past, doing that has allowed us to pay off the traffic lights downtown without actually having to raise debt for because we were able to use all the free cash for that, rather than having to actually raise taxes for the town, which they had authorized. So it's just, we do have some differences here, and I think there's some conversations that should be had about near-term spending versus sort of longer-term planning on for capital.
Sure, but I think you have to agree, Dan, on a $68 million budget to be only a couple $100,000 apart, according to what you're saying, is not a bad place to be in March. Oh
no, I mean, I don't think that we're in bad shape at all. Absolutely, considering everything that we've gone through. No, it may be that we should look at some of the, once we have a little bit better clarity on what the new federal aid looks like and can be used for. It very well may be that there's some uses there that we can look at for certain areas in town too, depending on Actually,
based on what I heard Friday, I'm going to guarantee you there is.
Well, we're getting sewers, right?
We're going to get flying machines and everything.
Perfect.
So it's actually
Monorail.
It's a monorail. That's right.
Can I just point out?
1 second, Dan. Travis wanted to bring forth something. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Dan, I think this highlights in blue here. If you're looking at the screen, the FinCom model is around 2.3. So we do have that variance between the two. At the moment, I think one of the items is that under 1.85, we still need to discuss, and I need to get clarity from the select board on where they are with a number of items that would fall into this category of raise and appropriate, right? I think that may close some of the gap that you're talking about. Additionally, some of the things that, as you mentioned, under the budget, that if we think are better under CARES, as we discussed last week with the board, for the facilities management budget that was adjusted by about 30-some-odd thousand, or anything that may fall under ARPA. Once we get more clarity on that, we certainly have some room to move here. And then again, I have no clarity on this situation with where the school budget is. I did update Keith based on their previous conversations, but I think part of the gap that you're talking about, I think we certainly may see some movement on.
Yeah, sure. I think that there's a perception that has seems to have crept into town that there's just piles of money sitting around for sort of the taking, and requests are starting to sort of build up in a greater preponderance than normal, and I just think that we just want to be careful about sort of spending while not getting back to given that we're in a good spot, getting back to where we were pre-pandemic for some of the things, and resetting that things that we had to put on pause.
Ben, you had a comment? Yeah, I actually have two quick comments to what Dan's talking about. I mean, I do appreciate the desire for conservatism and making sure that we have a manageable budget into the future. But my two comments, because particularly about capital, the first is that Travis has been trying to put together actual spending so we can actually project what we're going to need for capital years into the future. And I'd like to see, I don't have a problem with set-asides in general, but personally I would like to see a little bit of ensuring that we're sort of setting it aside for specific purposes and not setting it aside for the sake of setting it aside. And that also kind of relates to a second piece, which is what Travis had talked about with respect to policies. The Finance Committee has always come up with policies, and we're trying to work within those policies to make sure that we meet the goals that the Finance Committee sets forward, and they're very reasonable. And The budget that Travis has put forward has done that, and I think that if there was any particular reason that we don't think it's proper, we should change the policies.
Just real quick, the policies that you're referring to, those are town policies that are adopted by both the select board.
Correct.
And the finance.
That is correct, yes.
Yep.
Yes, thank you for that
Sorry,
clarification. So those are the two things that I would say about, in response to Dan.
Okay. Tina, any comments?
One, but I think I'll hold it for what I imagine will be another conversation on this topic.
Great. Anything else, Dan, tonight?
I just, if I could respond to Ben quickly, I believe that our set of recommendations are also within those policies. So, it's going to come down to sort of a conversation we have. And I hear you about not setting aside money just to set aside money, but there are, if you build that set aside up and build it into the budget, you can eventually do different things with it in theory, right? You can use it to raise debt under the levy limit and use some of that to make payments off for larger projects. I mean, there's more reasons to build up this set aside rather than sort of matching it directly with spending from year to year. So,
yes, I do agree with you, but I would just add the comment that I'd like to see it be a plan for the set aside as opposed to set aside for its own thing. That's just my personal opinion, and everyone else can disagree with me. But personally, I think the set aside is a good thing. But I think we need to, if we're going to use it for debt, I think we need to create a debt model that reaches those goals.
Sure. Well, let's do that. But there are definitely big spending plans that this board and other boards in town have, for the future. So we know there's a desire to spend. So you may not need to have an exact plan right now, but you know it's coming. But anyway, thank you.
Travis, did you want to make a comment?
No, I was going to say one of the items around the 1.85 obviously is a number that you could probably argue should be lower, right, on the other end of the spectrum, right? And I think 1.85 as a minimum certainly is the number that I'm comfortable with based on the number of things, which is making sure that we have the capacity in for items that are probably going to be borrowed that we would like to see not necessarily a debt exemption on, and now that every item that was previously non-exempt debt, that is to say debt under Prop 2.5, is now off the books, that we do need to maintain that capacity. So I agree with that point. But again, I mean, it seems like we're talking about areas of degree. I think as we get a little bit more clarity between now and early April, I don't know, quite honestly. I think it may not be an issue, but we're going to have to see where some of these things shake out. At where we are right now, we have a variance between the FinCom model and what we've been looking at, which is based almost entirely on that number at the moment.
Excellent. Again, Travis, my high compliments. Just exceptional work. The financial presentation and our position overall is stellar. I'm very impressed. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the warrant development for May 10th, 2021 annual town meeting. Anything on that, Travis?
So we do have Mary Greendale, who requested to have this conversation. I think it's something that we can have a conversation of whether or not something would be a citizen's petition or it be supported by the board. So I have that specifically called out on the agenda. I also have specifically called out the TAC request, as that was a previous vote of that group that would go through the select board before it gets to the warrant, and then I can start with an overview as we did last week, although again it's in the 30 article range, so I think it might be best use of time if we let Mary introduce her concept, which I know she's vetted with a few groups in town.
I would agree. And I see Mary Greendale with us this evening. Good evening, Mary. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you all?
Doing good. The floor is yours if you'd like to introduce to us this evening the concept of the proposed long-range plan. Okay.
So I think everybody knows that I've been plugging for planning. That's just sort of my nature. And it's only been a couple of years ago, maybe it's within the last 18 months even, that there was a meeting where I think the Finance Committee, your board, and the school board, the concept of having a long-range plan or a strategic plan or a master plan, because all those names get thrown around, came up. And I have been, studying this, researching it, talking to other communities, blah, 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 trying to figure out exactly what it is that I could suggest that we try. So what I came up with was a comprehensive long-range plan. And as much as I know that we have lots and lots of committees, I am suggesting that we have town meeting establish a long-range planning committee. The reason I think we need a long-range planning committee is because there's nobody who is charged with paying any attention to our plans. Nobody oversees whether or not everybody's even aware of what they are. The other day I went down to town hall and I went through all of the plans that were sitting on the shelf, one shelf, not all the shelves, but they were all about, you know, downtown master plans, economic development plans, and so forth. Very similar concerns and interests within those plans. But there's nobody who really is responsible for making sure that those plans are a part of the fabric of town government. Now, lots of people have said, oh, we just need another master plan. And having worked with the agency that oversees planners, municipal planners, I learned that master plans have certain limits. They're limited because they are land use based. And yet there are any number of situations in which we need to be taking a view from 30,000 feet instead of just right on the ground. And I finally found that the American Planning Association, which is the planners, the land use planners, have come up with a process using a comprehensive long-range plan. Inside that process, they have two different pieces. One is the traditional master plan, and that continues to be the silos of town government based on the normal land use kind of considerations, economic development or housing. There are 7 of them that are in the statute. The other piece that they've brought in is to be able to step back and look at how do all of these things tie together, and in tying together, where are there obviously sometimes overlaps, but more likely intersects? And are we paying attention to not either going at cross purposes to one another or in fact supporting one another? So in a nutshell, what I'm proposing is that I know that let's say that my favorite plan is the long range plan that was done by the town of Concord. And if anybody really wants to look at what a plan can look at that one. That said, you need to stop drooling because they cost $350,000 and we just can't afford that. So I backed out of that and then went to looking at more about what could we do ourselves. And as I said, we have a lot of plans. And so it seems to me the first thing we need to do is to establish a committee. And that committee needs to go through all of the plans and studies and reports and blah, blah, blah that we have. Now, the Open Space Committee has a plan, the parks have a plan, the schools have a plan. How do they all work together? Do they work together? Should they work together? Are we all striving for the same vision of what we want this town to be? 5 years, 10 years, 15 years at a maximum. Most things are changing so quickly, I'm not sure you can go too far beyond that. So what I'm suggesting is that this committee take all of this information that we have, pull it together in a system, and go back to the community and say, okay, in 1997, we said that we wanted to preserve our character and at least continue to look like a small town, even if we knew that we really weren't small anymore. We are now a mid-sized town. But what do we want to hang on to and what do we want to jettison in terms of how we're doing things? So I would be asking that committee, if I had the option, to review everything, itemize the goals and and some of them are in policy documents, by the way. research the relevant data and identify the software that we can use that would pull this all together. And then using forums, and I did this when we were doing, I think it was 2014, when we were doing the downtown vision. People in this town respond very well to if they're asked what their opinion is. We got 700 responses to a survey about what they wanted for downtown. There's a lot of really good information in that work. So we would use forums and surveys and whatever means to reach out into the community. I've talked to some people who have experience doing these things and are, interested in helping. You need to get into the business community, you need to get into people who are property owners but don't necessarily live here, have tenants and so forth. And then the goal is to try to take all of that information and build some consensus across those groups about what we want, what we're looking for, what we want, what we envision future Holliston to be. Now, that would be phase one. The second phase, and this committee would have to figure out what do we need to get to phase two. I believe what we need is to hire a consultant that would then help us take all of this stuff and then plug in those things that come out of the more traditional master plan and the themes that come out of the less traditional but now common from the American Planning Association, the sustaining practices, or sustaining places is what it's called, that tie everything together. Not sure I'm explaining this very clearly, but that's the goal is to end up next May, not the upcoming May, but May of 2022, with information from this committee about what we have, where we are, sort of lay that floor, knit everything together and lay that floor, and then contract with put out an RFR and spell out what it is that we're looking for at that point. And can't prejudge right now exactly what that is. And then go pursue a contractor to help us wrap it up. But I think by engaging everybody now, people are aware. Certainly with the 555 project, people have started to notice some things. I think people being at home more this year than probably ever. I think they've started to notice things. They might like some of them, they may not like some of them. But I think this is a really, really good time to try to catch public opinion and try to craft it into something that can really be a good guiding document for us for the future. So that's basically it. Now, I've said that the committee, it sounds like it's a big committee. It's 13 people. The reason for the size is because this is a working committee. This is not, many committees can get away with meeting just once a month, and maybe they'll figure out a way in which they can do that. But the bottom line is that this is the working committee, and going through all of those plans and so forth is not going to be easy. And then trying to do all the outreach to the community is going to take time. So the committee itself would report to the town administrator, but the actual appointment of the people would be the chair of the select board, the chair of the planning board, the chair of the school committee. I have talked to David Thorne of the planning board. I don't think David's here tonight. He did say he was going to try, but at any rate, and I will, certainly try to get a hold of the committee as a whole in terms of support before town meeting. I would like to go around. It's a little bit harder to get everybody on board, and they've been very, very busy, as we all know. Okay, I'm going to stop there and just say thoughts, questions, whatever from you guys.
All right, we'll start with Ben. Any questions, Ben?
Yeah, a couple, probably more comments than anything else. So first of all, Mary, thank you for bringing this up. One of my goals this year was actually to work on a strategic plan, and you stole my homework. So, this is hard, and I know there's a lot here. I think, I've certainly had some conversations, several occasions. Stacey Raffi actually sort of put the germ in my head to think about some of these things, because I think that the community really needs some of these kinds of mechanisms. I look at this as, you know, this particular group as being something that could potentially be a great a process, a sort of a mechanism sort of by which to work through these things. Because, I mean, one of the things that I look at that I find to be challenging, you know, and we're talking about capital planning and things like that, is that we have a lot of needs in town. We need some ways to figure out and balance those needs in terms of either citizen input or a policy document. And it would be easier to have a vision statement or policy document like what you're putting together to sort of say, okay, what does the community want? What are we trying to accomplish? I mean, we all have our own ideas, and I don't think anyone's necessarily thinking too far outside the box, but I think it would be helpful if we could sort of say, like, well, this is more important than this when we look at the community and what they're putting forward. So I guess that was sort of a long-winded way of me to get to a point of actually asking the question, which is, would this group would be giving feedback to the town administrator, or would they be reporting to town meeting, as you think about it now?
Right. No, I think that they would be working with the town administrator and with the town boards and committees. They certainly, if I had my druthers, I would love to hear a 5-minute, 10-minute report every year about how we're holding on to that plan. I think it would make our boards and committees more responsive to trying to follow it. My fear with this plan, or with any plan, is that if you don't keep it as part of the regular conversation within the organization, it's going to sit on a shelf and gather dust, and we have enough of those. So, you know, I think that could work very well, but I don't want at this meeting, a town meeting, to block this, or so construct it so tightly that then, you know, if you want to make a change or whatever, you got to go back to town meeting to do it. I'd like to give the town administrator and the people who will do the appointing and the people who are on the committee the flexibility to be able to decide what the course of action should be.
Okay. No, I think this is great. I think this is something that I think would be very helpful as we look at things. And I would just hope, and you do include some language about this, that this would be something that would be ongoing, and it would be something that could, you know, frequently, like as you say, maybe once a year, talk about what's happening and how things are going. And then, you know, there's a survey on an annual basis. How are we doing? What's changing? Because sometimes those things do happen. But I think this is a great start, and I like it very much. I think this could be a great tool for the community and really help folks like ourselves being able to say, what is the community looking for, rather than just sort of putting our finger in the wind to see which way the wind blows. So thank you.
Thanks. I like those. I like your suggestions, and I'll take them to heart.
Thank you.
Tina, any questions?
Yeah, Mary, so, you know, as you were talking, I've obviously read this through, and we've had conversations about this as well. I was just writing down some notes here, and, you know, things that, so I'm the liaison for, I didn't count the number of departments and boards and committees, but quite a few of the land use boards and committees and departments and so on, and as well as the Economic Development Committee, schools, finance, and a couple other ones. Planning Board, if I didn't mention that already, Zoning Board of Appeals, and so on. I think that there is a need. I think that when you look at overarching zoning bylaw changes, I know that the Planning Board plays a significant role in that with the town planner, but I think that that's one area. I think the long-term solution for trail maintenance and perhaps even growth in the trail is another one. I think sustainable economic development is something that I've heard mention of through all the liaison efforts that I've had. I hear that come up, and if not sustainable, then just economic development in general, direction the town is looking to go in. Things like net zero goals for the future. We know that the state is going to end up with a net zero goal for 2050, and towns will slowly or quickly start getting on board with that. That's another area. General congestion and public transportation is another regional area that will and does touch Holliston. I really like your comment about creative public engagement. If there's one thing that I hear over and over and over again from residents is that people crave ways to engage, and I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen Zoom have such huge attendance in Holliston, because it offered a new, one could say, creative way for people to participate during the pandemic. So I really liked that that was in there, and I actually think that's quite a significant piece of it. Things like 260 Woodland Street, and do I have the number right? Sometimes I get that number wrong.
It's around there.
Yeah.
Yep, in the range.
The 260-ish Woodland Street site, I think that's a perfect example of, well, what are we going to do with that? And what's the process we're going to follow to consider those kinds of questions? I think those are all areas that would be well served by a focused group, directing their attention on addressing those issues and coming up with ideas and so on. I like it. I think that this would be a compliment to the EDC. I think that this would be a compliment to the governance committee. So I like it for that reason. I will say that 13 seems big and perhaps cumbersome, but you know, you look at the list of who you would see included, and they're all good members. I would just want to come back and read one quote from our town clerk. And she mentions in a letter to various boards and committees and town department members that she'd like to remind everyone that we are a town run mostly by volunteers and neighbors. And that really strikes me as quite significant here, because that's what you're proposing, is volunteers to serve in this capacity. And I think that's exactly how Holliston runs at its best. And so I like that. I think that that's a really great way to address some of the issues that you've raised as this committee. I'm not making any sense anymore. I like it. Let me just leave it at that. I think that's all I wanted to say. I like the idea of attaching a dollar amount. I think that funding it makes sense. I looked at the EDC. I see they have a small budget that they can use for the efforts that they see as valuable and important, and also for staff support. So it makes sense to me in that regard. And I think that's all for my comments. So I just want to thank you for preparing a draft like this and an idea like this, and I am willing to engage in the idea of this as a warrant article, perhaps supported by the select board.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good. A lot.
All right. Mary, a few weeks ago, Bobby Blair came to us and he brought forth an idea to enrich all our lives by putting forth a community farm. It included a black cat walking across your table.
I can't help it. He's really
Well,
not
he's a new
that
star.
Yes, hey, don't walk all the way across.
Look at that. Hey. Anyways, we noted that Bobby brings all of these ideas forward on a cyclical basis, always for the betterment of the community. And of course, we supported what he wanted to do. I'm going to put you in the same boat. Your constant involvement with town government and your constant thinking to evolve and challenge us as elected officials is something that I personally value a lot. And I think you brought forth another item that fits us in a way that threads a needle. We talked, I think, Ben, you brought up the idea of a strategic master plan when you got elected. I think you talked about it in your goals for the coming year.
Yep.
Back in January, I mentioned that the board needed to start trying to put some four corners around what that meant. Well, as you said, Mary, copied your homework. I think what you've given us is something that strategically allows us to use the resources of an appointed committee wisely to target and enrich areas of our community going forward in a sustainable way, because that's always been what's missing. This board has supported several studies that we know, that we all believe are going to have a sustainable, important benefit to the way the town looks at water infrastructure, sidewalks, traffic, and things like that going forward. This long-range planning group doesn't seem like it will step on the toes of those types of initiatives that are so important to our community, but rather harness that information and find a place for them in these plans. A long-range planning group, to me, is sort of the group that looks over the shoulder of all these elected boards over the next several years to say, hey, don't forget about this, don't forget about that. And it brings in all of the information, whether it be from the capital planning committee that we talked about earlier, or through evolving and changing things that we all know Holliston will go through. So you got 2 thumbs up from me on the concept. I've read the proposed language. I will ask Mr. Ahern if he's had Mr. Tellerman look at it yet. just with respect to content, because I have one question, and it's not a critical one, it's just curious. How would this group's work interact and or collide with the planning board's general law / bylaw enabling legislation as carved out by general law chapter 40A and chapter 41? I want to make sure that there's no sense that we have a planning board that's charged with doing X and then a long-range planning group over here that will do Y unintentionally.
I'd like to, I would appreciate it if you know, folks did check that out. I think it's always wise to know exactly what what I'm doing. But I think based on what I've looked at, the planning board will continue, and so will the whole master plan piece, will continue to touch all of the 7 points that master plans cover. That's not in this phase, but in the next phase. So they're not at all mutually exclusive. And I think that they will all tie together. But first thing is for other people to start to understand what this process is. And I'm going to see if I can find somebody in the state of Massachusetts who will come here. Hopefully somebody that I know that's been a planner for years and come and explain it better than I'm able to explain it. So speaking of the plans that are in place, I know there is some concern that some of those are premature or whatever. And what I want to say is that plans are going to happen all the time. And by plans, I mean studies as much as anything. I know I can't make a decision about something unless I know what it's going to do. Those things are department driven. Those things are, you know, if the police department knows that it's got a expiration date stamped on every one of its cars and so forth, it goes ahead and it rotates them and knows exactly when that, all of those things that are routine matters or even not routine matters that belong to departments and so forth need to continue. You don't stop just because you're doing a long range plan. It has to be a moving document. It can't stay still. It shouldn't stay still. And it needs to be able to change sometimes very quickly. So it is in fact the opposite in reality. And it's not just, we all seem to have this sense that you do the master plan and it's like the great book. That's not it. It's a document. It's a free flowing document. And
a living document. Yeah.
It's a living document. Yeah. That's sort of trite, yeah. But okay. Okay, John.
All right. Any comments from folks on our Zoom call this evening about Ms. Greendale's long-range plan and proposed article for the warrant upcoming? Hearing none. Mary, I think you've got a thumbs up here. We'll work on the language and see if anything changes. But I want to thank you again. You're a community treasure, and thanks again for bringing it forward.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Mary.
Yep.
The TAC request, is that you, Tina, or is that Travis?
I'm happy to present it. So the Traffic Advisory Committee met back in February, and in response to some agenda items agenda items supported as well by the Safe Routes to School Task Force, the Traffic Advisory Committee approved a recommendation for the Select Board to consider an article called the School Safety Zone Improvement Article that would add an LED four-way stop sign at Church and then Woodland and Railroad, an entering school zone sign ahead at Elm and Woodland, and then a rectangular rapid flashing beacon pedestrian signal down at the new Woodland Street crosswalk. After listening to some of the Finance Committee comments when they were looking at the highway budget and their questions related to the signage line item, and then that brought in the TAC funding that was received at town meeting in December. I think what I would suggest is that we take out the entering school zone ahead sign at Elm and Woodland and pay for that out of the December town meeting request. That was a small ask anyway, so I would alter the recommendation to that extent, to remove that, have that paid for out of the town meeting article, which would leave the LED four-way stop sign and the rapid rectangular flashing beacon.
Okay.
Those are, again, they were supported by the Safe Routes to School Task Force, and approved with a 6-0 vote by the Traffic Advisory Committee back in February.
Very good. Is there a request for a motion this evening on those, or are they going to just be part of the upcoming vote on warrant articles?
I would say that any of the ones that we'll discuss, and I'll discuss a couple other ones next, are going to be more, the warrant closes on the 29th. If there are things that we know we want removed, or will be better in the future or anything like that, to give me that feedback now.
Can I, I do want to ask a couple questions about this before we move on to. So I guess what I'm confused. So Article 14 in the December warrant was for $52,000.
Right.
And this is, like, we've already spent that money, or this is just like, it wasn't quite in that?
This would be a second TAC request.
Okay.
Right, so a different set of requests. The December town meeting approved equipment for monitoring and enforcement.
I thought signs were in there too.
There was
the whole point there was like a $40,000 sign line.
No, 4,500. So Chief Stone and I went, we went back and forth on this one, because that LED four-way stop sign could, in theory, be funded out of that December town meeting, but at a price tag of $6,000, it exceeds what was in that warrant article. But the 150 to 200 or so for the entering school zone ahead sign would certainly be covered by that.
I would say one of the confusing things that we're going to have to be dealing with, and I've already been dealing with, is the word signs.
Yes.
Because there are some signs that TAC is talking about that are in the tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
So in terms of $4,500 and what that request was there were a number of requests coming to TAC that are, look, I need a
stop sign.
Stop sign.
Right, I need I need children playing sign, whatever.
Yeah.
One way, those types of things. That all certainly fall within $4,500, allows TAC to answer questions and respond.
Okay.
But to answer a question of, we need something that makes it safe for children to cross the street with flashing lights, outside of that realm, right? But it's still the word sign. So I think branding is part of this, I would say.
Well, so that gets to, like, another question that I have, which is, does it make sense to continue to have, like, these specific requests, or would it make sense to say, put, like, a TAC request of, say, $5,000 in the budget, like, on an annual basis? I'm making up a number. I don't know what it is, but it just seems like if this is going to be something we're talking about each time, does it make sense to continue to do it each time, or does it make sense that the TAC needs a sustained budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's this board and the Finance Committee's discussion to have. I think TAC is making the recommendation. I think how the board wants to move forward on it is the board's decision, but the recommendation is for these three items. That was the recommendation, and then if this drives a warrant article, I would say that it's for two of the three things that are recommended. Does that make sense? And then in terms of signage, to Travis's point, I look at it as sunlight or electricity. If either one are needed to operate the sign, it's outside of that $4,500 sign budget, and also the highway budget. I don't mean to be facetious about that, but so I think that's the board and the Finance Committee discussion to have.
Does it make sense to add this to the request from the our state representatives to say, like, we want something for safe routes to schools?
I would argue, then, that these are more urgent than on a wish list, going to which is how we sort of define this as a sort of priority wish list. I would argue that these are more urgent, and they're the timing in terms of May is helpful because they're in place for the start of the school year, which I would say justifies the May request as opposed to an October request.
Sure. I would just make one suggestion. Is that if we could get some school input, I think it would have a little bit more.
In what way? Like
strength.
School committee?
Like a school committee.
Well, so we have a member of the school committee on the traffic advisory committee, and we have a principal from the middle school, the vice principal rather, Jeff Beatty, who is on the Safe Routes to School Task Force, as well as George Larini, who's on one, and Chief Stone, who's on the other. So in that way, I feel like they're pretty well vetted by public safety and the schools.
I think one thing I want to weigh in real quick is to state the TAC is a relatively new thing.
That too.
The TAC was established within the last year or so, I believe, and it had really never been, a location where people could go to suss out the various needs of signage and traffic-related issues. the board was created, the committee was created to be inclusive of the interests, including schools, that the community would need to review each of the items. I've always thought that there would be a period of time where the TAC would almost be overwhelmed by requests and then level off. And I think your point about funding something in a budget that's more of a maintenance level, that might come, but I think we're a year or two away from that. If I recall correctly, and it may be COVID related, somebody mentioned, I think it was Suzanne Edelman, the TAC related requests were lagging about 6 months behind.
That's correct.
So once we get through this process and start tackling some of the requests and dealing with them, there will be a maintenance level time period. It's just not now. It's at least a year away, I think, maybe longer. Is that accurate?
I would agree that we are definitely playing catch up, and that yes, we will hit a leveling off period. And I think these requests will be not what appears to be every town meeting. They're coming forward with a pretty large amount. One comment I would make, and this has nothing to do with TAC or Safe Routes to School, but at this board here, one comment I would make is when you look at the rectangular rapid flashing beacons, these are expensive items, and we know we have multiple locations in town where we've used them in the past, and we could identify many more. We'll see them on the Complete Streets Tier 2 prioritization plan. We will see them come up, and we certainly could address many more rail trail crossings where we might want to consider having them. So you could go in a couple of different directions with this, right? So we don't have any kind of mitigation funds for large developments that come into town. This could be one of those, you know, if the town were to ever consider something like that, we could go there for a funding source for safety, traffic safety improvement mitigation. Another one could be the rail trail builds out a bigger ability to ask for improvements, because this particular crosswalk is from the rail trail.
You also have any questions?
Yeah, I think the last thing is just like, I'm just trying to I understand, you know, and I honestly, like on a cognitive level, I don't have a problem with any of these things. I think it's important. I just am trying to set my own expectations. Is this going to be something that, you know, I'm going to expect to see every, you know, for a few town meetings, to John's point, that this, you know, the expectation is that we're going to have a bunch of these kinds of things until we kind of level off, and I just kind of want to sort of set my own expectations. That's something that's important to me. So.
Last comment, and then we can move on, John.
Yeah,
Ben, you can expect more updates, and I think I need to do a better job of coming out of the TAC meetings and coming out of the Safe Routes to School Task Force meetings with updates on the types of requests that might be coming, and then we can maybe have those conversations earlier.
Okay.
And do some more planning.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's the answer. I don't know what the answer is exactly. I guess that's just.
I just do to the question specifically of should there be a TAC budget. I think that's something that we could talk about over time.
Right.
When it comes to some of these things, right, the large signs, they're just not going to fit within a budget, right? If they're responding to a specific issue, it's not an issue of on an annual basis we're doing one electronic solar or plug-in sign per year, right? That's not what this is. There is going to be a certain element of the planning process that goes with this. I think the clarity of the sign budget within DPW that's very small, $3,000 to sort of replace Warren signs, be more evident what the intention is within the budget, which I always want budget clarity. If TAC had on an annual basis this amount of money to be responding to sort of feedback, certainly I think we could build a budget that was TAC related in the future. But I don't know that, you know, when it relates to these specific requests that they're talking about, that I have a problem necessarily with the warrant article model. I think it does work to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think just to your original point, and this will be the last thing I say, is just I think we do want to make sure we're clear on what signs are, what each of the places are that they fall, so it would reduce some of those questions that if it's in the DPW, this is what it's for. TAC is asking for certain specific kinds of signs, and this is beyond what was approved in town.
All right, let's move on, and I will point out that in all likelihood as kids come back full-time to school, they're going to need signage to safely cross streets and navigate our streets, and that impact is clearly brought on as a result of COVID. They haven't seen the schools in a while, so maybe we can point some of these costs towards. Never mind. That's the trying to make an argument on the fly, Chief. How do you like that? Down the road. So we'll talk about the funding for this when we do the articles down the road. Okay. Anything else? Any other articles currently projected for annual town meeting warrant?
Yeah, so I'm just going to show, and again, I mean, this is a long list, and I won't go through it again. I did the full read-through last week. There's a couple questions on here. I just want to get, again, feedback from the board, make sure everybody's comfortable with a few things. As it relates to the pension liability stabilization fund, I've been working with the liaisons, just want to make sure that there's no questions left to be answered on that. People are generally comfortable. Same thing on the recycling revolving fund as it relates to the smallest revenue component of the solar. Make sure that everybody's comfortable with it, where that conversation is going. I think both of those are pretty much I'm comfortable with on the warrant. I just want to make sure that the group is as well. And then lastly in this group is the establishment of the revolving fund. And I gave a little bit of background on that last week, which is specifically if we were going to look at expanding our EV charging station opportunities around town, whether it's through a grant fund or not, that we would want to recover the cost of that and be able to sort of have revenue support the expenditures. This is something that may be moved to October, depending on the timeline, but I just want to make sure that, either way, I think it's the right mechanism. If there's any concerns of the board, I just want to, sort of make sure I'm on top of those now. So is there anything in that group?
No.
Anybody?
I'm sorry, just repeat, which group are we talking about here?
So the pension liability revolving fund for recycling, which is the smallest revenue component of the solar, or the EV charging station, if we feel like that's going to time properly with those grant opportunities. Is there any questions on these or any discomfort? Okay. I am waiting. There's going to be, as it relates to road acceptances, I think one of two here is going to make the agenda, the warrant, and you'll be looking at most likely a public hearing as it relates to that. Number two, we're waiting on information, and if it were to make the warrant, you would also be having a public hearing. That's our process. The other two, I forwarded some of the background again. It's going to be a question of making sure that these are on the warrant. Then the planning board is going to have to do their public hearings, and that's just the timing of it. But if there were any questions that anybody was uncomfortable with, I think the question on 24, removal of temp moratorium, I answered last week, which is we're not changing anything about retail. This is just a previous language that isn't needed there anymore. So in the 26 through 31 group, here's where I need the most feedback. So for the easement for the First Congregational Church, this is related to the septic again. A lot of conversations over time. The project was approved in December. And what we're looking at is a much better overall plan, which relates to a gravity system, as we were able to work that out with the First Congregational Church. The way that this would be formatted is to take funding from the previously approved project, which can all work because this project with gravity costs less money. We would reappropriate within the original appropriation, no net impact to the taxpayer, and we end up with a much better project that's better for the town. All of that language has been developed by council, and again, I appreciate very much the amount of time the First Congregational Church has put towards that. Is there anything on that one that anybody needs an update on, or anybody's uncomfortable with? Nope. Okay. For the Blair Square design and engineering, this is the one that they are absolutely hoping they have their concept, but what they really need, what they've been told by the CPC is, come back to us when you have construction documents. This would be funding that. My office would lead the procurement on it. I would be the point person for engaging a consultant to do that work. But there is a price tag in the mid-40s to do that. I think certainly we can have that group back in here to make that pitch again. They've been here a few times, just making sure, the sort of level of comfort that this board has with moving them forward and putting them on that trajectory to be in front of the CPC going into October. Like, this is the town commitment up front, essentially.
Any comments? Weigh in.
I get one.
Cool.
So, to a little bit of an eye roll we all probably felt about the idea of adding another committee with Mary's presentation. The Blair Square Committee, do they end after the construction documents are funded and presented? Do they continue to have any involvement in what comes next? They would be the ones, the Blair Square Committee would be the ones to take those construction documents and present that to the CDC? Do we streamline the process when we get the construction documents? Do we hand them back over to the Blair Square Committee and say, now take that to this, like I said, to the CDC and move forward to
CPC? We're not going to the
I
Center
don't
for
know why I
Disease
keep
Control.
saying that. I'm sorry.
I don't want them involved in this at all.
Fair
No.
enough.
So to the CPC, I understand. So I think at this point, I would say, the Blair Square Committee has been at this for a long time. They have the general sort of overview, which they showed, we put on the screen previously, and moving that to the construction document phase. I would want certainly them to have feedback with the group that is chosen to put together the construction documents. I think at this point to remove them when we're that close to the sort of end goal, and then, have the input at the very least, it would probably be through my office, which would be engaged with the contract for the design engineer firm. But I would certainly be looking for their feedback on the development of those construction documents. Moving to, the next stage of that would be bringing that to the CPC for overall funding of a construction project. Again, all of that would need to be bid out through my office, through the chief procurement officer, which is through the town administrator's office. And, there would not be a direct oversight of actual construction work by the Blair Square Committee. You could look at that as a potential stage to say, all right, now we can separate. Again, I don't know the harm in sort of having that group there to make sure that if there were questions from interpretation of construction documents, that there would be somebody there to say, no, this was the intent. So whether the group would be disbanded after construction documents are created or after the project is done, I'm not sure. I think we can tackle that as we go.
Okay. All right.
Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Keep going.
Okay. 9 Green Street demolition, again, this was approved. The PAR group, PAR Corp was brought on after this was approved for design engineering in December. They have been providing some documentation and some ideas as they go, but the actual deliverable that they owe us leading into May is the demolition plan. Right now, I have a general cost of between $50,000 and $100,000, the placeholder I have in here, which will again affect all of those bottom lines that we talked about earlier when it comes to raise and appropriate, is $100,000. It'd be great if that came in more at $50,000. This is something where, again, the long-term plan for that site, which we own through taking, if anybody's unfamiliar with it in the downtown area, is still sort of unforeseen what the end goal is going to be. The first thing that we need to do is take down that building, make sure that the site is safe, work with DEP to close out our involvement with them. So this is something that I have on here as a placeholder of $100,000. That's within the 1.85. May come down. Is there any question on that and where we are with PAR? That deliverable I will hopefully help out to you by the end of this week. DPW facility feasibility study, Ben and I had another update with the liaisons today. Is there anything you'd like to update on that, Ben? And just making sure that everybody on this board is comfortable with the May timeline for that. I'd be happy to get into it, but I think.
Yeah, I think, we had we talked to Michelle, Ben wasn't able to make the call, so be curious to hear. But when I heard some of his feedback on the previous Finance Committee meeting, he seems open to doing something. I think, it's pretty clear this, I haven't actually been to the Arch Street, but the Central Street facility is just completely inadequate and needs to be updated. And I think we have, we have two issues that I would point out. And the first is that we'd have to put an enormous amount of investment just to get these buildings up to a place that they're usable. And then the fact is that the use would not even meet the needs of a 21st century Department of Public Works. So, a study to be able to determine where to put it, how to decommission a site or both sites, and whatever that looks like, and any other potential, pitfalls therein. It's a complicated kind of thing because we already have two facilities that are old, and so we're not really entirely certain what we have there. We had some conversations, thinking about a couple things just to make sure that we're looking at the condition of the property, like the land, making sure we're doing some soil testing and things like that to make sure that we have that on the radar. And I think we got to get the ball rolling on this and start to our conversation about planning and capital planning. Where does this fit? and we need to have some numbers to be able to put to it, because it's a big difference if it's, $10 million versus $20 million, and what does that look like for the town, and how do we plan for these facilities, because we need a plan for these, because they're just not, they're not adequate.
Right, and so from a feasibility standpoint, just for sort of anybody out there unfamiliar with the process, feasibility study is going to look at things such as the actual properties, what we have available to us in the future to be able to plan some certain things, right? So right now we have an Arch Street facility, Central Street facility. They both have issues. But the question is, right, if the answer is going to be a combined facility, where does that end up, right? And that has complications of decommissioning one site potentially, a number of issues that we can't even get into a design engineering question until some of those questions are answered through a feasibility study, right? So this is not, and this is some of the feedback I've heard, is well, you're moving along all these things at the same time. Feasibility study leads into what is eventually going to be design engineering. This is not the step that the next thing is building something, right? So this is answering a lot of questions that this town needs to answer. And so I think the timing of May, to me, makes a lot of sense for that purpose, and I think that's what some of the conversations that Ben and I have had with the liaison.
Yes.
And so at this point, the dollar figure that we have tied to this is $75,000 for a feasibility study. That is based on a previous estimate, so I'm going to go out and make sure that we're looking at the right number. Talk to a few other groups besides the group that had given us that quote. But at the end of the day, right, is May the timeline that we all agree is the right one for this feasibility study.
In addition to the feasibility study, we did have an assessment done of both locations, I think about a year ago. I don't know where that report is with respect to public facing. I don't know.
It's online.
Okay. To see it is to understand how decrepit both locations are. This item's been brought forth before. It's the proverbial can. It keeps getting kicked down the road, and it's time the town realize if we're going to have a functional Department of Public Works, we have to confront the fact that both facilities are falling well short of servicing the equipment, the safety, and the overall needs of the community. We need a single facility built that represents what the town expects for services going forward. You don't need to go far to understand that when you have a water department barn that has holes in the roof, inadequate storage of equipment, and people eating food in the same room that they store their vehicles and have all of their gear, is absolutely unacceptable. And Arch Street's no better. So it is a must-need article, and as far as I'm concerned, it's going to be there until something happens to either place. I said it 100 times, I support no dollars going into either facility for maintenance or upkeep. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. They're that bad. So I think it's a great article. It's time we confront the problem and just move ahead with it.
And in addition to that report that is online and shows some pictures, additionally, James Keith has put together some of the outputs and due solutions and projected costs, which Ben's worked on with him, and that would be going into the article for everybody to sort of understand the needs and what may end up costing us if we were to not do something with the facility over time.
Somebody made a point too that said basically they were in the building 20 years ago in another capacity, and they thought that the Arch Street one, and they thought it should have been rebuilt then, and that was 20 years ago. So it hasn't gotten better. So sorry.
Ben, I have a quick question. Ashland, do they have a new DPW facility?
Don't know. The ones we were talking about, I talked about with Sean about potentially taking a look at was Grafton. He says has a nice facility.
Okay.
Medway, I believe, is in the process. I'm not sure if they've completed their facility. And we wanted to look at Hopkinton. And I will point out that Hopkinton, they're not happy with it, but we kind of want to see where they have made where they went wrong, so we make sure we don't make the same mistakes.
Okay, so I mean, just as an observation, a couple of the towns that are on the governance committee's comparison towns have new DPW facilities.
Right. Yeah, sure. If we have any more, I mean, I think COVID sort of puts a damper on some of that stuff, but at least we can have some conversations in some of those towns to sort of see what they're doing, what their experience has been, and what they like and what they don't like, and then we can kind of use that as some feedback to keep in mind. So thank you.
Travis, next one.
All right, next one, I think, a couple, this came out of our budget discussions, the fire and EMS organizational study. I do have feedback from the group that does these studies the most, which is a group called MRI. There are others who I can also get quotes from, the Collins Centers in this sphere as well, for example. But I think one of the things is, and I had a brief discussion with the chief on this, I think the study would be done through my office as well, just to sort of make sure it's at outside looking in kind of thing. I think this is one that I would get feedback from the board on, but maybe on the October timeline, it gives us the ability to have a little bit more financial clarity when it comes to free cash. If we were to want to entertain this now, which is in the just under $30,000 range, we would have to probably be prioritizing this against something else. Additionally, what it does is some of the changes that the fire chief came back to you on that are sort of moving in the direction of what we all discussed during the budget process. The changes to fire, adding some support within that budget, the changes to EMS, adding shift diff to sort of see if we can change behavior and address some of the issues, and adding training to get people along, as the chief described. The October timeline allows us to sort of have some more feedback on how that's working as we approach this with the community. At the same point, I know it was something that was generated, that the interest was generated through this board, so I wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to sort of give me feedback on it before I remove it from May.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Anything else? We already talked about TAC, so.
TAC was up. So the long-range plan, I will change on this list to the Comprehensive Long-Range Plan Committee would be the name of the article, would be my understanding.
That's correct.
And there was a discussion previously, let me highlight the right one. There's discussion about a dollar amount. I don't have anything to that effect at the moment, or is it in the draft?
I'm sorry, for?
The Comprehensive Long Range Plan Committee, I don't have a dollar amount tied to that.
I don't see one here
Okay.
either.
I think it would be something that would come in subsequent years.
In October. So this would be setting up a
Possibly
committee.
upon report kind of thing. They would be looking for funding something, but we've got to form it through this town meeting first.
I got you.
Yeah,
So
so phase one doesn't have an ask.
It might have been potentially software, but I think they would need to have, to get together to figure out what they need before we can fund it.
So right now I have this as a citizen's petition. We could talk about whether or not it's a select board sponsored article, and it would be for the Comprehensive Long Range Plan Committee to be established as sort of described. I will run that by council and get back as quickly as possible. I also have a citizen's...
Just real quick,
Sorry?
I don't object to making it a select board article simply because it fits, as we've said tonight, the thinking the board has had about maintaining some kind of a strategic or master plan.
Okay.
So unless Ms. Greendale prefers it to be a citizen's petition, I don't mind putting it under the select board. I think there's consensus here tonight to support it.
Okay. I do have a citizen's petition as it relates to scenic roads for South Street and Campersall. The feedback I provided through council is that to make that binding, it needs to be sponsored by the planning board, the Concom, or the historical commission, and that information was given to the citizens, so I will wait on sort of making sure that comes in, provided that receives one of those sponsors, I will move that over. And finally, one item I just want to bring, I believe October may be the time frame on this one as well, but Phipps Tunnel is something that I think we can all agree we get excellent service from a volunteer group of people as it relates to the rail trail. I've done an incredible amount of work, not using a lot of dollars. I think the thing that we all need to understand is going to be coming at some point. Some of the things that are outside of their purview. Phipps Tunnel is one that we know. I've had a number of discussions with that group on it. I think that it may be requiring some taxpayer dollars to handle. At the same point, that group is also sort of reaching out to get some of the information that we need. And I don't think, at the moment, without having any free cash to sort of appropriate towards this, or something that would be CapEx related, that at the moment I would be making the case to put this as raise and appropriate. At the same point, I would say it's coming, most likely in the October timeframe. So unless anybody had anything else, I'll remove this, but put it on our October timeframe.
Yeah.
All right, and other than that, I will give you, sir?
I did have one question about that. Didn't we, did they file that grant for work on that, the rail trail thing?
They did. The time frame is like June to get back from it, though. I don't think they get a response for quite a while.
And I would add too, Ben, that there are a couple elements to the Phipps Tunnel section.
Okay.
And the grant addresses one piece of it, but it is I would argue it's the smaller of maybe two or three bigger pieces.
Yeah, absent, because I haven't seen, this is the first time I've seen it, so I don't know what exactly we've been asked.
There's a number of components. Drainage is a huge component.
And I know that was part of the grant, was a big part of that, but I didn't know if there was any structural issues that were driving some of it.
There's a retaining wall, There's additional drainage, and then there's the tunnel itself. Yeah.
Okay. So that one I think I will remove and just sort of have on our radar for October, unless that group gets back to me very quickly in the next week, in which case I will obviously bring it back to you.
Would that group qualify for CPC?
Yeah, so there are, we had that discussion. Again, where they are right now may fall into sort of design engineering type things, the same conversation around the Blair Square committee where we get the design engineering done and then we go to CPC kind of thing.
If CPC wants shovel ready.
Yes.
Okay, you good, Travis?
That's it.
All right, we're going to move to board business. Mr. Sparrow, a few items on your plate here. We'll
Sure.
start the meeting minutes of March 1st, 2021.
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 1st, 2020.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Superette donation, Brad?
I'm going to make a motion to accept a $400 donation from the Holliston Superette to the Senior Center in support of the Senior Nutrition Program, and this will be received to the Nutrition Fund account.
I will second that motion, and thanks to Brett for putting out the jar.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. And lastly, I think this is notice to proceed for the Winter Street water main replacement.
Yeah, so I put the motion in the email.
I was just about to pull it up, and you did, and I appreciate that you doing that. So, but I want to. Of course, I lost it.
All right.
There it is. Okay. So I will make a motion I will move to authorize the notice to proceed on the Winter Street water main replacement project as per the contract previously awarded to CJT and Sons.
I will second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Any other business to say this evening, Mr. Sparrow?
Nope.
It is fine.
Two things, yes. Travis, do you want to bring back the other two tax recommendations? I'm not sure. We need to know from the town clerk whether or not we need to vote, make a motion to add the 25-mile-an-hour sign onto Bullard Street. That was one of three recommendations that came from our February 24th meeting. And if so, does that come back as an agenda item? And then the second was the other tax request. I should know this by heart. The traffic sign audit and potential creation of a Google Doc. Do you want to bring that back to an agenda in the future for the board to consider?
As I have zero information on that, which maybe I should, yes, let's bring that back. On the Bullard Street sign, where the incorrect miles per hour was posted, that is something that I think we can fix without a vote, as the sign that was put up is invalid and put up incorrectly.
Okay. And then the
traffic
second
sign audit on a future agenda?
Yes, I'm happy to share some details if you want. The second thing is, Ben and John, I don't know if you caught it on Friday, DLS came out with an alert. There's a new change where municipalities can now opt out of mosquito spraying. So looking into that a little bit, Holliston would be one of those communities that could make the choice to opt out of aerial spraying. You need to have an alternate plan, so this is not about not addressing mosquitoes in our community. It would be about developing an alternate plan. And so I bring it to our board because this is a select board vote. This is not a Board of Health vote. This is not a Conservation Commission vote. This is a select board vote, and it's a new thing. So I wanted to just raise that on your radar screen. I believe it would need to be a future agenda item for us to consider. I think there's probably some expert opinion we need to hear from if the board wants to consider this. But it's, again, a state law now that allows municipalities to opt out of the current management plan for mosquitoes and replace it with an alternate municipality-approved plan.
Where would the alternatives originate from?
I don't know. There's very little information, and even on the website, mass.gov, there's very little. This is why I think we need some expert opinion.
Yeah, and I think if a future agenda would work. I think the Board of Health, the vote would be through the Select Board. I think Board of Health and actually CONCOM as well would be. I spoke with the CONCOM agent today, and his thought was, certainly there's been discussion on spraying and the plan when you need to be in place, but there are certain other things that fall that are very beneficial to us that the group that handles mosquitoes for the state is able to handle things that we're not able to do ourselves, and so we wouldn't want to not have them handling certain things that have been very beneficial to Holliston, whereas spraying is something that is more of a conversation that we should have. I also spoke with Rep. Dykema today briefly about it, as, you know, this is one of the items that was sort of on her radar. I knew she had spoken with it before I came to town. So I think sort of giving a full conversation to it would certainly be beneficial.
Sure, okay.
The timeline, I think, would be relatively quick, so I think we want to do it in early April because,
May 15th.
yeah. Okay.
All right, put that on a future agenda.
That's
Anything else, Tina?
No, thank you.
All right. The only comment I have tonight is I wish I was Michael Hunt. I really wish I was 21 again.
Will?
Will, 21, what a great age.
I'll tell him that.
That was the best time. Anything else on the Zoom tonight in terms of other business?
It was a good year, wasn't it?
It was a very good year. Hearing that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We'll see folks next week. Anticipate a longer meeting next week. I hope you have a great one, though. Thank you. Good night, all.